Why do I feel like I'm sitting in a hole today?
I don't know.
Alex, are you ready to shake it up?
I'm ready. Go ahead.
Can you hear that?
I can.
Yeah. Barry, how do you like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's right. Hey, so this is this little egg I got. You know those little egg shakers you see in the music stores?
I do.
Yeah. I'm just using one of them. All right, well, you stumbled upon another session of the Podcast Engineering Show. This is going to be a good one. Let's do it! Yes! I don't mean to sound lame when I start the show, but anyhow, welcome everybody. I'm happy you're here. Welcome to the Podcast Engineering Show. My name's Chris Kern. I produce podcasts for the likes of Forbes and Dun & Bradstreet and E+ and other companies as well, and select business authors. Every week on this show, we bring you podcast production techniques on a silver platter. That's right. We get down and dirty. We talk shop with podcast producers, engineers, and other specialists. We talk all about the audio engineering side of podcast production. It's not about the listeners or the marketing or anything. It's just about the audio engineering side, the sound, the equipment, the workflow. I actually have a background in audio engineering and in the music business. And when I entered podcasting about 5 years ago, I found that almost no one who was producing podcasts knew the fundamentals of audio engineering. And you could hear it. Yeah. And you could still cringe at a lot of shows. Right, Alex?
Oh, I know something about that.
So if you implement the best of what you learn here, your podcast will sound a lot better and you'll spend a lot less time producing them. That's important too. Barry, are you psyched?
Oh, forget it.
I'm telling you. This show is brought to you by the Podcast Engineering School, which is the school I launched to teach people how to learn how to produce podcasts at a professional level, to start a podcast production company and all that kind of stuff. So today, we're going to get into this. I actually saw a picture on, I think it was Instagram, of Alex Knight's setup. And I tweeted at him and I was like, dude, you got to come on the show. And he's like, dude, no problem. So anyway, I'm psyched to have you on, Alex. You're the product manager at FeedPress. You're the founder of Hologram Radio, where you're producing a bunch of shows and you're co-hosting a show or two. And The Impromptu. That's the name of the show you're co-hosting, right? The Impromptu.
It is indeed.
That's cool. And you got a bunch of other shows on hologramradio.org. So welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me.
Did you bring your lightsaber, or was it just me?
You know what? I think that's you, and I think your listeners know that's you.
That's right. And good thing, right, Barry, good thing Alex doesn't have a crazy name, right? Because some people have crazy names, right? Like, remember my old buddy McAllowitz, right?
That's a tongue twister right there.
I'm telling you. Alex, I think you know what we do on this show. We go through a speed round where we want to know your setup. We want to know your equipment and your workflow. Like when you're getting ready to record a podcast and you're in your little studio and you're sitting in front of a mic and you're ready to go, about to hit record. Just walk us through the mic, what it's plugged into, what you're recording on. Just take us through each bit by bit. But just give us the overview first.
Sure, sounds good. Oh, I love talking about gear, getting nerdy about gear. I could do it all day. Do you have about 12 hours for this?
Yes, we do. This is a podcast. We'll just save the excellent. MP3 at like 8-bit and like 4 kilohertz, and then it'll save some save some hard disk space.
Awesome. So let me just walk you through my setup. So first of all, like many podcasters, I record in my own home studio. Now, the space itself, so let's just start with the space so you can kind of get a visual picture of what it's like. So I record in a 1-bedroom apartment. So it's a decent size, not the smallest, but the room that I chose is the living room because the bedroom happens to be slightly too small. And so what I had envisioned was a space that I could have where it would be more than just one person. I could have multiple guests. So already I knew the bedroom wouldn't be big enough and I needed a big enough desk that I could fit a couple of people. So I have all my stuff in the living room.
Nice.
I got myself a sort of L-shaped IKEA desk. which worked really nicely. I treated the room acoustically. It's not complete yet, but I did install some acoustic panels. So I've got one wall, sort of, it's, if you can think of the living room as sort of a rectangular shape, one of the longest wall has acoustic panels, almost the entire length of the wall. And then on the opposite side as well, there are more acoustic panels. So that did a very significant job in reducing a lot of the sort of extraneous, nasty reverberations that you just don't want to get. You don't want it to sound like you're in a garage or a big open hall or something like that, right? And I'm sure you and your listeners know that a big empty room with hard reflective surfaces is not your friend.
Oh, jeez. Totally.
So that's what I did for acoustic treatment. And I do have some plans. Like I don't have anything on the ceiling right now. I would like some kind of diffuser. So when the budget allows, I definitely will be doing something like that. So starting with my desk, what I did was I decided there's no way that I can live without mic booms. So I got myself 3 mic booms. I've mounted them permanently into the desk so people can just easily swivel them around. Just looks a little bit nicer than, the clamp that kind of sits at the side of your desk there.
Right.
As for mics, I have 3 Shure SM7B. So I just wanted consistency between the host and the guest. I just wanted to kind of everyone be on the sort of level playing field. So those are the mics that I have. I love those mics. I've used them for years. I know a lot of people use them in the broadcast world. It's a very versatile mic. You can use it in broadcast, podcasting. I mean, singers use it as well. I've seen people use it to record instruments as well. So it's just an overall really great mic. And in comparison to the giant price spectrum of microphones that exist, it is a pretty affordable microphone because, you can spend thousands of dollars on microphones.
You know what I've never done, Alex? We use, back in the music studios, obviously an SM57 was the mic to use for almost a lot of things, but especially guitar amps. I never tried recording a guitar amp with an SM7B. I wonder what the hell that would sound like.
Yeah, it's really good. And, now when tracking in the studios, like a lot of people will, sure, there are people that will just use a 57, but quite common now, a lot of people will use 2 microphones and they'll blend the 2. So usually it'll be like a 57 and something else. Sometimes it'll be a condenser microphone.
Sennheiser 421, that was one of our other favorites.
Those are great. Also popular on toms. It's a good tom mic. So it's a great mic. One of the reasons why I think a lot of people use it too is because the SM7 can withstand a very high pressure range. So like if you were to stick that into the kick drum of a drum set, it would be able to handle that without an issue. So that's one of the reasons people like it as well. It's just a really well balanced microphone. It sounds really good in a lot of applications.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is it, under $500, between $400 and $500 or something like that?
Yeah, it's like $350 to $400, something like that.
Right.
Not too bad. And by the way, I just want to mention to everybody, I just realized that in today recording this session, I almost called it episode, in my basement, normally I put up 2 big pieces of foam behind me, lean it up against the closet doors, which are wooden. But today I didn't. So I'm wondering if my voice today sounds a little bit more live than usual, but it's probably not much because this room is fully carpeted and stuff. But anyway, I thought that would be good to point out for the regular listeners who hear me every time when I have the phone behind me. This session, I don't have the phone behind me. So, all right. So do you want my answer? I can tell. You can tell? Yeah. I
can tell. Definitely. It's subtle, but you can hear.
Sure. Yeah.
So we talked about the microphones. So now, as far as my audio interface, I've got a bit of a hybrid analog digital setup here. So in front of me, I have a Mackie console. It's a VL1604. It's complete overkill, has way too many channels. The reason why I got it was because the preamps are very high quality, and it had enough channels that I could, if I wanted to do a mix minus and bringing like a phone line, multiple Skype lines, it basically would be a console that would have room to grow. If I want to record a band, I can do that as well. Not that I have an immediate need to do that, but it has so many features, was a good price. That's the console that I chose. And I also have a Avid M-box 3. That's my audio interface. So what I've done is I've taken from the Mackie console, each channel has, or at least the first 8 channels, have direct outs. So basically, I take the direct out signal from each channel on the console that goes to a line level input on the Avid interface. And then the Avid interface is what I use in my digital audio workstation, which happens to primarily be Pro Tools, although I do use Audition quite a bit as well, just because my world demands it, just because a lot of radio stations work with Audition, and it's a great program, and it has a lot of really, really good features. So some things I like in Audition better than Pro Tools. So I kind of bounce back and forth depending on the application that I'm working with. As far as processing is concerned, so under my desk, I actually have a 14U rack. Now, not all of the pieces of hardware in there are being used, but as far as my mic is concerned, it's going into a new preamp that I got about a month ago, and I'm just absolutely in love with it. It's made by Warm Audio. It is a single microphone preamp, and the model is WA12, and it is just the best preamp I have ever used. I absolutely love it. It models an old API pre, and it just has a really nice warm sound, and just it's fantastic. So that is what I'm using for my pre, and that is going into a DBX266 processor. So that's getting a little bit of compression. Usually I actually record dry. I've been experimenting with different compression and whatnot. I actually want to upgrade and get a different compressor, also made by Warm Audio. I've been eyeing some of their products lately, so I'm kind of getting addicted to their stuff. So DBX266, DBX makes great stuff. I'm sure a lot of your listeners probably know that. It's a very affordable compressor, and I know a lot of podcasters use it as well. It's a 2-channel compressor. I also have, above that, I have an Aphex 204 aural exciter. Now, that's not currently being used, but I have used it for some applications quite commonly. Like, it became really popular in the 80s for mixing, like especially like with rock bands and stuff like that, because it has this, the actual aural exciter feature adds this sort of nice crispness and clarity to the top end of your mix without adding harshness. So it's really nice. I actually used it just a couple of weeks ago to remaster a friend of mine's death metal album. So it did a really nice job doing that. I've got a 6-channel headphone amp from ART in here as well, and a Furman rack mount power conditioner, and I also have a patch bay installed. So the patch bay is probably one of my more recent favorite additions, just because it adds so much flexibility to what I can do now that I've got everything wired properly. I don't have to reach around to unplug stuff, to try different compressors, to try different preamps. I've got everything normal to the patch bay, and it's just, I can't tell you enough. Like, if you haven't used a patch bay, once you've got it set up, you've spent all the money on the cables, because it does require a ton of cables, and you got to spend a lot of money for cables. Once that is set up, it is such a breath of fresh air, just allowing you to you just plug in stuff, patch different stuff. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
Oh, and actually, I missed one piece of gear, which is also really good. My co-host, now I used to use this as my channel strip. My co-host now uses it on the Impromptu. It's a DBX286S. So that is a channel strip. So it's got the preamp section, it's got the processing, and all the other features that a channel strip tends to have as well. So that's an excellent piece of gear. Also, another very affordable piece of gear from DBX. If people haven't tried it or they're not familiar with it, people should really look at a DBX286 if they don't already have a preamp for their microphone. That's another thing that just over the years, learning and trying different microphones, dynamic microphones tend to be a lot more gain hungry, especially the SM7Bs. They're very low output, so they require a very high-end preamp with a lot of gain, a lot of clean gain. So that's something, when I talk to people and help people out with their setups, I actually had somebody who bought this microphone, and a lot of people I think are starting to buy these microphones now because they're seeing a lot of podcasters that they admire, that they look up to. So they said, well, if that person's using the microphone, it's good enough for me, right? And they buy it and then they use it on this cheap $90 Behringer mixer. And then they have to end up turning up the gain pot all the way up, and they end up introducing a lot of noise. So that's not good. And I'm trying to make more people aware that they need to be careful. They need to shop around. They need to consider their budget when they're buying microphones, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, we talked about that on the show. But it's a great point, and it applies to everybody, especially new folks who are looking to buy mics and sort of upgrade. Someone like me and probably you, it's like if we want to upgrade to a new piece of gear, we can just or upgrade to a new setup, we can just buy a couple things at once. But a lot of podcasters, they need to buy things in stages. So it's definitely most important for those kind of folks. All right, so you regularly have people over and you sit at your L-shaped desk and you record episodes right there, right?
I do, yeah. The Impromptu is recorded every Friday in my home studio. My co-host Michael comes over and we have our little ritual that it really has become kind of a ritual or a routine, whatever you want to call it. He comes over, I brew coffee, we chat for a little bit, just a little bit of warm up, and then we get right into it.
And so you said you compressed to tape using the DBX 266, was it?
Yeah, so I did use that previously, but now he's still using the pre, but I will go in dry. I'm still experimenting. What I'm finding, because although the room sounds pretty good, I've noticed even with a noise gate or expander, I do notice that there are a few spots in the room that still need to be treated. Like right now behind me, there's a fireplace and glass is just terrible for reflections. So I actually have one of those room dividers that you can get for like $150. And then I just threw a thick blanket over that and that's in front of it. So there are a couple of things that I would like to do. Maybe buy some thick curtains and hang them in front of the other problem is I live on a kind of a busy highway, and the only reason why there isn't a ton of noise right now is because there is I actually have double glazed windows, and double glazed windows make a huge difference for canceling out a lot of the noise, but it's not totally infallible. So there are sometimes, like if a loud truck drives by, that'll come through. So it's not the ideal setup, but even with a noise gate, it can be still problematic in post, because one of the things is when you apply compression, you're evening things out, but it can also bring the mix to the forefront, and it can bring issues to the forefront. So for example, because we're talking in the same room and he's 6 feet away from me, even with that distance, there can still be issues with mic bleed. And so the mic bleed contributes to it just adds this ambience to the sound that I don't like. So I spend a lot of time in post. Basically, when he's not talking, I'll cut those parts out as much as I possibly can. So that's one of the things why, like, I even used to use a noise gate, but that didn't work all that well. And I find that the features on these DBX products are just far too limited. DBX actually makes some better noise gates, but you got to buy a separate unit for that. So I've experimented with some of those. I probably will end up integrating one of those. The DBX 1074 is a dedicated, I believe it's a 4-channel noise gate, and it has a lot more parameters that you can tweak, like the attack and the release time, and you can set a key filter to trigger exactly when the gate opens and closes based on a specific frequency. All those like little nerdy details that you really want to have fine-grained controls, because the other DBX units, they're more based on the program material, so they're kind of like an automatic gate. They're automatic, other than, like, you can change the ratio, but it's highly dependent on the program material that is coming in. So I do want to have control over those features. So that's one of the reasons why I'm going to be looking for one of those other units.
Nice. Yeah, and you can always also just, do it in post. That works too.
Yeah, that's what I have been doing. And I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to have stuff processed coming in though is because I want to limit the effort, the amount of time it takes to do that stuff. But I have tweaked my workflow, so it's not too bad. But yeah, I mean, anytime I can eliminate from my processing workflow, that's all the better.
Right. Yeah, sure. Time saver. All right. So you're going into the Warm Audio WA12 and your co-host is going into a 286S?
That's right.
Yeah. And so do you come out of those two units and then go into your Mackie mixer and then come out of your Mackie direct into the interface?
That's exactly how I do it. Okay. Exactly. Yeah. And that one of the nice things about that is because the Mackie is a pure analog mixer, it doesn't have like a USB port or FireWire in it. Because of this setup, the mute switches on the console work as proper mute switches. So when I mute my microphone, it actually mutes the microphone and mutes the signal that's getting recorded into the audio interface. So if my co-host stops talking and has to cough, I'll just mute the mics and that won't get recorded at all, which is a problem with a lot of analog digital hybrid mixers. So for example, like one time I used to have a Mackie Onyx mixer, which has a FireWire audio interface built into it. The problem is that you would mute a channel and that still gets recorded. That just mutes what's going to the master bus. It doesn't mute the actual stuff. Like everything gets recorded regardless whether you mute it. Right. And that's how a lot of digital analog consoles work. It's not like that's actually one of the things that I've learned and loved from the broadcast world. Like in a radio station, a lot of those consoles have very specific features. Like a mute switch on a radio console is a mute switch. It completely turns it off, pulls the mic out from the mix, which is really what you want. I mean, you can call it a glorified cough switch, but I mean, that's really to me how they should work. And I really am waiting for somebody to really step in and fill this spot in the market, because I really do feel like this is a problem that hasn't really been solved. So many companies making mixers that are geared for recording studios or live mixing, but no one has built a mixer with specific podcaster features in mind. And actually, I was just talking to a friend of mine today about this. We were talking about how, now you can get these really nice MIDI control touch surfaces like the PreSonus fader ports. Behringer makes one, the X Touch as well. But what I really want to see is I want to see somebody come out with like a digital analog recording console with specific features that podcasters could use. So for example, you could have like a channel straight, and actually PreSonus has kind of done this on their new Studio Live, their budget Studio Live AR mixers. There's a built-in Bluetooth chip, so you can actually record your phone. But I'm not certain if you can do an actual mix minus and send something back through Bluetooth. I'm not familiar with it, if you can do that. But stuff like that, and also it'd be cool if you could do like a MIDI control on a specific fader. So for example, like on a lot of broadcast consoles, when they're connected to professional equipment like external sources, playback sources like CD players, turntables. I was actually at a radio station, and it was really cool being able to, like, as soon as I push the fader up that controls the turntable, as soon as I pull the fader up, the turntable starts playing. As soon as I push the fader down, the turntable stops. And same with the CD player. So being able to trigger sources like that is such a cool, neat feature, and I don't understand why that hasn't been brought to the commercial or consumer spaces like podcasters. I think they want that stuff, right? Because you can download cue card software to trigger sound effects and stuff like that, and that's cool. But there's something to be said, I think, for having that tactile control, to be able to control that stuff from a fader. So there's neat stuff like that I think. I just hope somebody builds a product like that.
I agree, and I often think of products that need to be invented, and I think a lot of us podcasters and producers think about that, but I think it will happen. I think it's just going to take way much longer than we think. We want it like by next year, but I think it's going to like take a long time, and that's just because the nature of podcasting that the money's not there, right?
Yeah, I don't know if the money isn't there. I mean, we know that there are tons and tons of people podcasting. I think the problem is with companies that make these products that are, their customer, their demographic is recording professionals. So this is just my own perception, is that they maybe don't see, maybe they're not familiar with the market. And so because their products are marketed around these pro features, that's new territory that they're not familiar with. I can definitely tell you, I can't point out the name of the company, but I was actually in talks to work with a fairly big company that a lot of people know that make pro audio equipment. And they were talking about how they wanted to build a new product specific for podcasters. So I was in the works to come up to sort of spec a whole bunch of things and work with them on that. But there are companies that are thinking about this, but the thing that I keep hearing is that they don't really know the space all that well, and so they're a bit sort of not sure how to approach the product.
Right.
But that's why they need to really reach out. They need to talk to people, find out where their pain points are, and build a product for podcasts that'll work. And I think they need to build a product that, I don't think any one solution will solve everybody's issues, because there are people at different levels too. So, you may be a beginner for a while, but you're not always going to be a beginner. And then, what happens when you suddenly want to start adding features? What about when you want to expand your setup? So I think somebody needs to build something that is expandable, that is sort of forward thinking in mind. So they can, if they want to add an additional microphone, they can add an additional microphone. If they want to have a mix minus setup, they can do that as well. So it's, this makes it sound like easy. Of course, anybody can build this, but obviously it takes resources and work and research and money.
Right. All right. So have you brought in people on Skype or taken phone calls through your mixer?
Yeah. I have done. I mean, I don't do that very often, but when I do that, it's usually through Skype. I haven't had any issues with Skype personally. For the most part, sometimes somebody will have an issue and I'll have to maybe jump to a Google Hangout. But I mean, again, just because Skype is so ubiquitous, that's usually what I default to. It's been really great on my connection. I mean, I have a really fast connection. It's been quite stable, and I find that when I'm talking to somebody who also has a good connection, it's pretty much solid. I don't have any issues with somebody's voice breaking up or getting robotic sounding, but it kind of really relies, it's very sensitive to the connection that you're on. So if both people on each end, if their connection is solid, usually for me, in my experience, it's been really, really good. The audio quality isn't, I mean, it's close, but it's not quite as good as what we're getting right now. But it's serviceable. I would like to add an actual landline. I've been looking at digital phone hybrids. They're a little expensive. Like the one that I want made by Telos is pretty expensive. There's another company called JK Audio, and they make some that are a little more affordable. So I'm looking at one of those.
I have that one, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I mean, there's a reason why radio stations still use phone. Is just because it's just easy to pick up a phone and call someone. And when you're interviewing somebody, you don't want to have to make it difficult for them to talk to you. Not everyone has a microphone. Not everyone's super tech savvy. They're not going to figure out how to get audio into their computer, right? So sometimes, depending on the person you're going to be interviewing, I don't want to have to ask somebody to go through all of that, especially if it's someone that's maybe a little bit of a higher profile person. You don't want to, like, if you're going to interview a celebrity, you don't want to make them like, oh, you got to jump on Skype and connect a headset. Like, you don't want that, right? So whatever you can do to make it easy for your guests, make them feel comfortable, I think that's always good.
Okay, so you're recording on your main computer. Let's call it your main computer. So when you do bring someone in on Skype, do you have an additional computer there with an audio interface, and that's how you bring them in and out of the mixer?
No, I have experimented with mix minus setups. I mean, I know how to do them. I haven't really, just because I do remote calls so so little. I haven't set it up that way again since I last rewired everything like about a month ago. I broke everything down, completely took everything apart, rewired my patch bay, and then I just got a little lazy and I didn't bother setting up my mix minus for Skype. So I haven't done that again. I do want to get, like, I've got this little adapter that does a splitter off the iPhone jack, so you can send audio in and also pull audio out. That works okay. But I would like to get, like, I'd prefer to have a separate box just for Skype, just for remote guests. And I do plan on setting something up like that. I've looked at these little mini PCs that you can get that run like a Atom processor, and they're fairly inexpensive. They're less than $200. So I'm probably going to end up doing something like that.
All right. So then how do you bring someone in on Skype now? Just on your main computer?
Well, what I'll do is, again, like how I did it is normally I'll just plug in my iPhone into the adapter, right? So I'll do like an aux send to send my microphone signal to the iPhone, again, because it's just a little adapter that splits the iPhone jack into send and receive.
Nice. And then so you're recording multi-track on your computer, and do you also have any backup recordings running simultaneously?
No, I don't. I probably should, but no, I haven't done anything like that. I know the Zoom recorders are great. I've used them, but I haven't set anything up like that yet. I don't know about a Zoom recorder. I like to have things in my rack because just for organizational purposes, I like everything kind of out of the way and not on my desk. So I've looked at a couple of solid state rack mount recorders. Denon makes one. Marantz makes another one that's really popular. So I'll probably, if I'm going to do it, I'll probably end up getting one of those rack units. It just records to like a flash drive.
Okay. And so your audio interface is an Avid M-box 3, right?
That's right.
Okay. And how many inputs does that have? I mean, you said your mixer has 8 direct outs, so can you bring all 8 into that interface?
Technically you can, but it's a bit limiting because, first of all, like, I'm not using any of the onboard preamps on the interface, and the interface already out of the box is limiting in that you can't simultaneously use the preamps if you wanted to and all of the line inputs. You actually have to switch back and forth between them. So, for example, on the front of the box, you've got 2 preamps. So there's a switch on the front that says you're either using the preamps on the front or you're using the corresponding line inputs 1 and 2 on the back. So, but it doesn't really bother me because I'm not using the pre. So I'm using all of the first 4 analog inputs on the interface. So I've got 4 of those coming out of my mixer going into the interface. It does have more inputs, like it has a RCA inputs 5 and 6, I believe. It's got analog unbalanced inputs via RCA, and it also has SPDIF, so it has a digital input as well. If you've got another interface that can connect with that, you can also bring in additional I/O into the computer via that as well, which I'm not using.
Well, that's good. That's good that you got at least four separate inputs you can use.
Oh, it's more than enough for now.
Exactly.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, and then whoever you bring in on Skype, they can have their own track too, so that's awesome, obviously. All right, so this is pretty good. You're recording everything really well, and now you record it into, let's say, Pro Tools or Audition. How do you do post-production? Okay, you have your all let's say you're doing 3 tracks. You got you, your co-host, and someone on Skype. How do you process each track, and how do you mix them together? What plugins do you use?
Sure. So for me, I'll try to succinctly explain this. So for me in Pro Tools, what I do is I, at the moment, record the dry signals coming in for each track. So every person gets their own discrete audio track. And what I do is I will apply, the first step for me is a low cut filter. So I don't actually engage any of the low cut filters, or high, if you want to call them high pass filters, on the mixer. There are filters built into the audio. Actually, the audio interface itself does have a nice feature. You can engage a 75 hertz high pass filter on each input, which is nice. But my first step is to apply a high-pass filter to each track. And I use the FabFilter Pro-Q2, I believe is the name of the plugin. And the reason I use that is it's the only plugin that I find that works really well. It has a linear phase process built into it, which a lot of EQs don't. The built-in EQs to Pro Tools and the built-in EQs in Audition do not. And what I find is a lot of the times, especially for my voice going in, it really depends on the high-pass filter. But if you were to do this, do a test, and I encourage the listeners to do this as well, is record into your DAW, be it Pro Tools or whatever you use. If you've got a mixer that has a high-pass filter, turn that on. Record a piece of dialogue, then turn it off, record the same piece of dialogue with it off, and just observe the difference in how the waveform looks. Now, for me, with my voice, and depending on the high-pass filter, some of them can be quite aggressive. And what I find is that when you look at the waveform, it ends up being asymmetrical. So if you were looking at the waveform, if you think about it, you've got sort of like the top part of the waveform and the bottom part of the waveform. And it tends to make the wave, if you're looking at it, it looks more like the actual what's going on is sort of pushed to the top of the waveform. So it looks really strange. So the linear phase process in the EQ fixes sort of those weird phasing issues that can happen with high-pass filters. So it doesn't really screw it up. So that's why I'm using the FabFilter EQ. And just regardless of the phase feature, that is a fantastic plugin. Visually, I love all of FabFilter's plugins. They work really, really well. They sound great. So that's what I use. And then I'll apply compression. So I use sort of an 1176 style compressor. I'll apply compression to each track. I may apply some de-essing if needed. Now, the DBX286 does have a de-essing feature built into it, so I have that switched on. So if it does need a slight amount of de-essing, I'll apply some de-essing to it. And then if I need to apply an expander to that as well, I'll do that to sort of minimize some background noise when somebody's not talking. And then after I'm happy with that, and that's pretty much the same plugins, same steps I'm always using, then what I'll do is I will loudness normalize each track. Now, for me, I'm a big proponent of loudness normalization, loudness compliance standards. So currently the widely accepted, well, it's technically not a standard, but it's being widely adopted now. So for mono and stereo, you usually will loudness normalize to -19 LUFS for mono and -16 LUFS for stereo file. So because each microphone is obviously a mono track, I will loudness normalize each track to -19. And then I have usually in my podcast, like the impromptu, we have a music bed. Now that's in stereo. So that's pre-recorded. And I have a session template in Pro Tools that just preloads the music in there. So I've got it already in there. It's already processed. So I don't have to do anything other than just align the tracks properly so they work okay. So stereo tracks are loudness normalized to -16. Once all of that stuff is done, I have a separate aux input track in Pro Tools, and I send each of the tracks in the session to that aux input. So I just bus it out, and then I mix everything down to that aux track. So everything's mixed down. So now I have a stereo track. Now I loudness normalize again to -16 because it's a stereo track. That's the one that's going to be bounced and exported out of Pro Tools, which ends up obviously going to my listeners. So that's kind of the final product. So it's a lot of steps. but it helps that I have like a session set up and a specific workflow kind of set up to make that a little bit easier. Now for my loudness compliance, I'm currently using a plugin by Nugent Audio. It's LM Correct 2, and that's a fantastic plugin. Not cheap, but it's really good.
Okay. Oh, that's a plugin called LM Correct 2. That's how you
That's correct.
set your loudness.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're on a budget, I always steer people in the direction of Adobe Audition because it has a feature called Match Loudness, which also does the same thing. It works really well. So if you're on a budget and you can't afford a $400 plugin, then by all means use Adobe Audition. It's great.
Right. And so now when you get someone coming in on Skype and they don't sound as good, what are some of the more drastic processing you've had to do to some Skype people to make them sound good?
Yeah, well, usually what I will do is I will process the track in real time before it's even going into my DAW. So usually, because Skype, as you know, is already a fairly heavily compressed piece of audio stream anyways, usually I'll just apply a little bit of compression, especially if the signal's coming in hot from their end. So again, that's the advantage of having outboard gear and with my patch bay, this makes this beautifully easy, is I can just patch in one of my DBX compressors, route the audio from Skype through the compressor, then into the digital audio workstation, which is Pro Tools. So it'll come in sort of more or less okay. Usually I do end up EQing a Skype recording because depending on how good it sounded at the time, I usually will have to end up EQing it a little bit. So I do actually, I've sort of built a plugin preset. I don't use plugin presets, by the way, and I generally steer people away from using them because it's one of those things where presets are a good starting point most of the time, but you shouldn't just take them as gospel and apply them. And it's something I always try to teach people, like take the time to learn what those knobs do and understand what they mean, because although it seems frustrating that there's a learning curve, you'll be better equipped to, and will ultimately produce better stuff if you actually understand what's going on with each of those knobs.
Yeah, I use effects chains, which are all it's like 10 plugins, and they all have sort of presets dialed in for the different clients and different hosts and stuff. But yeah, I never just apply some effects chain and just, that's it, it's done. I literally go through each plugin that's engaged and I just look at it and make sure that I'll move to the next one. And
yeah, that makes sense. Presets make sense to build your own for that kind of stuff. Like y'all usually have like as a good starting point, like I build I'll build a preset called male podcast voice. I'll build another preset called female podcast voice, because there are certain frequency ranges, more or less, that are like pertain to either female or male voice. So you can kind of start with those types of presets and then kind of work from there. Obviously, you have to tweak them. It depends on the individual's voice, right? Some people will have if you're talking to a woman, some women will have a slightly higher register, some will have a lower register. So you have to take all of that into account and really tweak that for the individual.
Totally. All right. Now, in terms of mastering, I know you said that within Pro Tools, you send everything to a stereo aux track, and that's basically your... And the reason you send it to a stereo aux track, is that because you cannot apply the loudness standard to the master fader? So you have to apply it to an actual track, separate track?
Yeah, so it's first of all, like just to provide some context here, because it's the difference. Like, I don't know if do you use Adobe Audition?
I have a couple times. It's not my normal DAW.
All right. So with Adobe, there is a bit of a difference between Adobe Audition and Pro Tools, because how I used to do it in Audition was, and it was a little bit easier and less steps, frankly, in Audition, is that I would just I would basically mix down the entire session to a stereo file, and then take the stereo file that Audition creates, which it does it in the session itself, and then I can just drag and drop that into Match Loudness and tell it to correct the audio and then export it immediately.
Right.
I can't really easily do that in Pro Tools, so what I found was I had to use the aux track, and what I do is when I was explaining earlier how I bus each of the individual tracks to a stereo track, I use the clip like commit feature. So I commit each of those tracks to that, which is like, it's like bouncing it basically to that internal track in Pro Tools, and then I have to apply it. So the plugin the way the plugin works is it has to analyze a piece of audio coming in. Like you actually have to click a button. It doesn't do it in real time. So you have to say, analyze this clip and then render the clip.
I see. And you can't do that on the master fader itself.
As far as I know, it can't be done with that plugin. I haven't tried it though. So I don't know if that actually works or not.
Right, I suspect sometimes, because I tried some things in Reaper too, where there's extensions for Reaper by SWS. It's an extension pack for Reaper, and it does loudness on either tracks or clips. You can set the loudness, the LUFS level, but for some reason you cannot do that on the master fader, like the final mix.
I believe the reason for that is just because it's processing or processor intensive. Maybe it has to, there's a certain amount of look ahead that it has to do. So it has to actually comb through the entire audio. And like when you analyze a clip, it does take, even on my Mac Pro, which has dual 12 core processors and 32 gigs of RAM, it still takes like a minute for it to go through an hour long audio file. It has to comb through the audio and try to find all the intersample peaks in it to give you a sense of where the issues are in it, and then it has to render. So I believe, as far as I know, I don't believe that can be done on a master fader. That's probably why.
Right? Yeah, that's interesting. As far as mastering, like the typical step of mastering, and again, typically in music, mastering happens, but listeners know that I master my podcast episodes, slightly. I'm not doing anything major, right? Do you put any effects, any multi-band compression or any, slight EQ tweaks in a mastering sense? No, I'm really happy with I don't really EQ unless there's a problem. I with these mics, I'm so comfortable with them, and they sound really, really good. I haven't had a need to tweak anything. Like I said, the only thing in terms of EQ is that high pass filter that gets applied as the very first step. And I do like to EQ into compression, not the other way around. I know some people EQ after compression. I do like to EQ before compression. So that's basically all I do. And I should actually say as well, because I didn't mention this, I like to use the Audio Suite plugins to process the track. I don't actually apply, I don't do a plugin insert on a track. The reason for that is because I spend so much time with Audition, I like to see how the waveform itself is changing. So when I process the Audio Suite plugin, you can see the changes obviously in the waveform after you've applied the process. So that's something I miss from Audition, because Audition has this nice feature. They have what they call their waveform editor, so you can actually see, and there's a preview mode, so you can actually see how the changes, it'll render sort of a preview of what the waveform will look like after you've applied processing. I really wish Pro Tools had that feature, but it doesn't. So that's why I use the Audio Suite processing features. That's interesting. So what are you seeing in the wave that you feel that helps you?
Well, I mean, I can usually, I want to first of all just see the level that it's at, so I can kind of tell whether or not it's going to be peaking or not just by looking at it. I just want to see I want to make sure the track is being optimally processed, because this another thing is some people new to loudness processing will just take a track without really understanding what needs to be done properly, and they'll just apply loudness processing. And loudness processing is great, works great, because it has a true peak limiter, so you don't go over those peaks and get any kind of clipping or nasty distortion, which you don't want. The problem is the track needs to be optimally processed prior to loudness normalization. And the reason for that is because if your track is way too loud, or compression wasn't applied, or it wasn't applied properly, and you have too many peaks and the dynamics are kind of all over the place, then what's going to happen is the limiter may need to work more aggressively. And so what will happen, just to paint a picture of what it would look like, is if there's too much aggressive limiting going on, you will actually see that the sort of the dynamics of the audio get squashed a little too much. So for example, it almost literally looks like, if you look at sort of the bottom and the top of a waveform, it looks like someone took a knife and chopped off the bottom and the top. It's sometimes people call it brick wall limiting, but it can ruin the dynamics. So to contain or mitigate that problem, what you need to do is apply the proper processing prior to loudness, get the levels down, limit the dynamics if it's too over the top, and get it to a point where it's kind of optimal, and then apply your loudness normalization, and then you're probably going to end up with a pretty good end product.
Right. Oh, my computer's on right here, and I just somehow it flashed on the screen a picture of Ralph Rivera. Hey Barry, look at this picture of Ralph Rivera. What do you see when you look at this picture?
Something from out of ancient times. Big mouth. Lot of teeth.
Yes. All right. So, Alex, you produce some other shows too. Now, when you produce these other shows, I'm assuming they just send you the audio, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the shows, a lot of the shows that I have here are recorded here as well. So the new show that we just launched, Learn Me Something, which I know is not grammatically correct, but that's, if you understand the point of the podcast, that's kind of the point. Yeah, so that podcast is again recorded here in my home studio, so I'm producing it here. But yeah, for some of the other shows, obviously I'll get files from people. They'll send me the uncompressed individual files, and I'll mix them down. I've got session templates set up for each of the podcasts that I work on to make things a lot easier and stuff like that. I mean, that's crucial. I mean, there's only so much time that I have. This is not a full-time job, and I'm not we're not even breaking even yet, which I would like to get at some point on our podcast network. But I have to balance my time between all the stuff that I'm doing. And when you start producing like a handful of shows every week, it starts to make you feel a little bit nervous. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? I don't have enough time. Yeah. You have to minimize any extraneous stuff that's going to create more work for you. And session templates are definitely key. You can do that pretty much in any DAW these days. I don't know any ones that you can't. Maybe Audacity, but that's kind of a program I try to steer people away from. Yeah. So, Alex, are you a big keyboard shortcut kind of guy? Oh, that's essential. That's essential. In fact, actually, in front of me, I bought this off of, I think, eBay a few months back as I got back into Pro Tools. Actually, I took about a 10-year hiatus away from Pro Tools, so I sort of had to refresh my memory because I wasn't used to a lot of the keyboard shortcuts. So I got this Pro Tools keyboard overlay. It's like made out of plastic. It's like this like jelly style keyboard. You just basically stick it on top of your keyboard, so you get all the shortcuts there right in front of you. So it's really, really handy, and it's absolutely essential. Actually, one of the things that I can't do in Pro Tools is map my own keyboard shortcuts, but I suppose that's probably a good thing, just because Pro Tools is so ubiquitous in the recording world that if you were to map your own keyboard shortcuts, it could become a problem if you were to, say, take your session and go to another studio. What are you going to do? Their keyboard shortcuts are not going to be the same as yours, so now you're going to be confused. Because it becomes muscle memory. So if a shortcut's going to become muscle memory, why not learn the shortcut that's built into the program that everybody else uses, right? So everyone's on the same page. So I kind of get why Pro Tools doesn't have that capability. Adobe Audition does, though. You can actually remap shortcuts. I know some people like that.
Right? Yeah, sometimes it's helpful. I know. I mean, I have like maybe 3 or 4 shortcuts because I still use Reaper as my DAW.
Oh, yeah, I hear good things about that.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you have Reaper is good, but if you have really good plugins, then you know what I mean? Like Reaper itself isn't really anything. It's just a multi-track DAW. Right. If you have good plugins, then you mix it down. That's
the thing. I think that's essential. Pro Tools is kind of in the same boat. Like Pro Tools comes stock with, I think, almost everything you really need. Like if you take the time to learn the stock plugins, you can actually get some surprisingly good results of it. You don't need to spend thousands of dollars But I think one of the, Audition is kind of unique in this area, which I think, Adobe adds so much value to their product by adding all of these incredible, like professional mastering tools and correction tools and built-in support for 5.1 surround sound mixing, all this stuff that you need. Like with Pro Tools, you need Pro Tools HD to do surround mixing, and you need to really buy third-party plugins to do. Whereas like for a beginner, this is why I always recommend Audition for people, because a lot of the stuff that the workflows and stuff like that I have in Pro Tools, you would need to buy separate plugins to do it. And Audition gives you everything you really need to mix and master something properly and get good results. And they keep innovating on the app regularly too. So I always see like lots of improvements in plugins. Like the one of the newer updates for Audition, I think just came out like a month ago. They introduced all these little enhancements to the UI on their plugins and stuff like that. So they just added to their parametric EQ plugin. They finally added a visual graph of like as you're previewing the audio, you can see the actual audio moving in the background, so you can see sort of visually where the problems are in the frequency range. So for example, if you knew you had a problem, like you could actually see if you had a problem at 400 hertz, because you could see like the audio moving on the graph. So it's kind of cool that they added stuff like that. So they just keep building those features. I feel like actually Avid is lagging a little bit behind in that area. That they're as much as people love that program, to me, there's not a whole lot of value that's being added. And I don't know, maybe that is their modus operandi. I guess they don't, Pro Tools hasn't done anything with the stock plugins in years. I mean, they haven't added any new stock free plugins. So I don't know if they plan to. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll start seeing more pressure from Adobe and stuff like that. And more, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I think, well, certainly people who are in the music industry who are using Pro Tools, they have all kinds of third-party plugins. So I guarantee they're not dependent on Pro Tools stock plugins. So they're beefing up on all the great plugins, and that's the whole trick. That's why I said I use Reaper, but I have really good plugins, and so the plugins are the thing that makes it sound good or bad. So Adobe Audition. That it really is a great program. I've used it a couple times, and from everything I hear from everybody, it really is a quality program. Actually, I want to ask Barry a question, because Barry, what if someone's going to use Audacity? Just like Alex was saying, that Audition doesn't need anything else because they're providing it. What is someone going to need to really get a good sound from Audacity?
You're going to need a couple of horses. A couple of mules.
People love that clip. That's why I have to play it. Well, Alex Knight, this has been great, man. I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all your workflow, your processes, your equipment. This has been really insightful. I'm really psyched for what you're doing over there at Hologram Radio. Everyone should go check it out, hologramradio.org. And thanks, man.
It was great being here. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for listening. I know you got a lot out of this. That's not even a question. It's never a question, is it? I don't know. Well, look, check out podcastengineeringschool.com and check out all our previous episodes as well. I mean, look, we've done so many previous episodes with so many great podcasters. If you haven't gone back in the catalog and checked it out, do it. All right, until next time, you know what to do and you know what to say. Now I got to wait for the music to catch up with me. Ready? Sound great!
Walk away from me where you can play that part so well, but you're playing out on me now. You like to lose control where it's quite a feeling, isn't it? They're floating, drifting down now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? It's a lie. I don't wanna hear it. What do you doesn't mean it's still the same. You're pushing me away. You walk your theories now where you're getting worked up on your now. You walk your way around somehow now. Yes, it hurts me now where that you don't talk to me now. Now that these words have stood apart now. You tell me that you found something better. How should I respond to that? Oh yeah,